So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are going to be looking at pre-season planning with professional football coach Ben Nicholson. Ben is currently at Huddersfield Town. He's worked at the likes of Liverpool, Man City. He does also his own freelance stuff on the side. So he's very much, his time of year is very busy at the minute. He's got a lot of ideas, a lot of information that we wanted to share with you and show you how you, not just at the professional level, how you use some of his knowledge and some of the things that he does and apply it to your level, whether that is grassroots, whether it's semi-pro, whether you're a youth team coach. A lot of these things that we're going to talk about today, you should, we can apply it to your level. And that's what we're going to try and do. We'll try and break it down so it's easy to understand and it'll help you this pre-season. My name's Dan. I work for Pitchero GPS. I will be here just to kind of help tee up the webinar, make sure that we cover all the right topics, but also I'll be manning the Q&A. So in your Zoom panel, you should have some options to either type a question, there's a chat. I'll be manning those two things, making sure that if anybody's got any questions, I'll answer them. Or I'll put them to Ben to answer, which would be probably the better way, because I don't think I'll have the same kind of football knowledge as Ben. But if there's something that is more for the Q&A at the end, I'll go through anything that we didn't go through during the webinar and put those to Ben. So please use those Q&A areas. And like I said, if there's something relevant to what we're actually talking about, I might just stop Ben and say, oh, I've got a great question here. Can we just answer this and this, because it's quite relevant. Anything else? As I said before, we are going to be recording this session, so we will send it out. And if you do have any other questions afterwards, if you think of something later on, then when you get the email, just reply to that email and you'll be able to ask those questions, and I'm sure we'll be able to get you an answer as well. So are we ready to begin, Ben? We all good? You're all good?
Yeah, all good my end. Yep. Just to follow on from what you said there, mate, as well. I think if there's that people have any questions, if you want to collate them, then we can either get in touch at the end of this webinar, or if there's anything a little bit more pressing, we can try and get in touch with the individuals afterwards and clean anything up as well.
Great, good stuff. Cheers, Ben. So first thing we're going to cover today is objectives of pre-season. So the thing that Ben has put down here is that the primary objective, we've got to prepare players for the demands of the season ahead. So can you talk us through how you would go ahead and do that in the situation now?
You touched on it at the start, Dan, as well, to be fair. I think the first thing to understand tonight is that although some of these concepts are used in the elite game, I think they're consistent throughout elite, semi-pro, non-league, amateur, youth. There's a lot that I will do working with professional athletes when I'm seeing them day to day that I would do when I've been working non-league. So just for a bit of background, I started out in non-league football as well. So a lot of these practices have been applied and yes, slightly tweaked and changed to different luxuries and different resource. But a lot of the things have remained consistent. A body's a body, a footballer's a footballer to a certain degree. So yeah, pre-season for me from a physical perspective, that's mainly my background. So yes, I do have one eye on the tack and the tech, but from a physical perspective, it is a case of just understanding what we're trying to do, A, for the group of players as a whole, but also B, looking at individuals as well. So it's not an exhaustive list, but every session we try and understand, well, okay, what are we trying to achieve out of this? And we will touch on some of the challenges when you aren't blessed with that sort of time with an athlete. But I think before each session, it's understanding, well, okay, are we looking at a conditioning component? Is it aerobic, anaerobic, repeated sprint distance? Is it a predominantly tactical day where a lot of the coaches on this call will want to get specific themes across? Is it in possession day? Is it out of possession day? Is it technical ability? Is it something as simple as back foot receiving that they're wanting to get out of that session? And all the time, the underlying theme for me is trying to reduce injury risk. Players will get injured over the course of the season. I think injury prevention is a term that we band around a little bit too often. I think we can reduce the risk of injury. I don't think we can prevent injury. And then again, it's understanding what the individual needs, like we said at the start, what are certain players or what are priority players looking to achieve. And I think this time of the season gives us scope to do some real good work with players. We're we're not trying to get Saturday games out of the way. I think, especially in non-league, I remember getting towards the end of the season, we were getting 3, sometimes 4 game weeks just to make up for all the fixtures that we'd lost down to the weather as well. So it's a perfect time of the season when on paper the pitches should be all right and should accommodate it, and we can get some real good work done. But yeah, I think the main theme is, what are we trying to achieve in each session? And I think we can sort of touch on how that fits into the week and such. But yeah, I think the danger of pre-season is we try and address all of those at the same time, and you tend to end up with, and this is through experience, you tend to end up with a training monotony from week 1 right through to week 6, week 7 of pre-season when the training starts. And then you're having players that are effectively unconditioned for what they're about to do.
And how involved do you get the players in the kind of planning out, the pre-season? Do you give them any indications they should be expecting in pre-season, what you expect of them?
Yeah, and again, this depends on the level. Obviously, at the minute, I've got the luxury of seeing these players 5-6 days a week, so they can have a lot more input than others. We do put specific individual sessions on for lads that we tend to lead them down a certain route and give them clips of bits in the game where they do need to improve, or present them with training data and GPS metrics of where they've maybe fallen short, and then encourage them to come back to us with the correct answer of, right, I need to work on this. And then, yeah, that's probably where their input is. Again, there's some non-negotiables as well. So I think if you are working with a squad that isn't aerobically fit, which potentially, depending on the level you're working at, they're going to come back from their off season in different areas. I think the whole group need to be aerobically fit. The whole group need to be able to run fast. The whole group need to understand your style of play. The whole group need to be able to do all these things. So I think while there is scope to get input from the player, I think if you have a hard and fast plan as a coach first, then it does prevent, like we said, this training monotony of just doing a mix match of everything every single training session. And I think by having real clear objectives, be that physical markers, be that session content, be that getting your style of play across, I think it helps you plan, and obviously it helps you review the session as well. And it just gives you that little bit of guidance. So yeah, that'd be my main take home, just from, if you're sitting down with a blank piece of paper before a session in pre-season, what is it that A, my team need, and B, do I want to get out of the session?
Cool. So we touched on it a little bit about the kind of weekly schedule that you're on. You've got this luxury of having 5 or 6, touch points in a week. Yeah. But obviously not everyone's going to have that luxury, especially on this call. Yeah. So we've put together this kind of example schedule of semi-pro. Do you want to talk through that for us, please, Ben?
Yeah, so again, like we said, some people will have the luxury of having more contact time with the players. But one of the questions we've got asked most frequently is, well, okay, how does a training week look for someone in semi-pro football, for someone in amateur football with 2 contacts, 1 contact, 3 contacts? And this seems to be the most common sort of weekly schedule in semi-pro football in the UK, and it's definitely one that I've employed as well. And it's this whole idea of a Tuesday training session, a Thursday training session, and then into a Saturday game. And I think we'll go into it in a little bit more depth further on, but it actually respects a lot of the key principles that I would want to put together in terms of overloading specific metrics and respecting sort of recovery principles and reducing injury risk as well. So the way that we've split this, it's just an example of having 2 key physical themes, like we said in the previous slide, understanding what we're trying to achieve in each day. So if we just really quickly have a quick run through sort of the Tuesday and Thursday and the differences from a physical and a tactical perspective. You can see that Tuesday I've badged as extensive. You could call it your bigger day. You could call it your match prep day, your team prep day, however you want to phrase it or frame it. That's basically us trying to achieve, from a physical perspective again, overloading the high-speed running metrics, exposing the players to a high percentage of their max speed, and then work on real bigger area stuff. So again, it's a real simple theme of how we would split 2 days. You can see on the Tuesday, we've gone bigger spaces, and the Thursday we go smaller. So again, we're already starting to see that there is a difference between every training session. It's not just every day we do whatever numbers allow, 8v8, 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 8v8. So, okay, can we actually go bigger on one day and overload all the metrics that are associated with a bigger training day? And then can we go on smaller areas, smaller pitches, and overload the different physical demands we would experience on that? And it's even those metrics in bold at the bottom, it may seem really, really simple, but I think there's a lot of GPS products out there that produce thousands and thousands of metrics. I still only look at high speed running and sprint distance as that first layer on my bigger day. So I'm not too interested in mechanical demands. I just want to see, okay, how much high speed running have the players done? What sprint distance have they covered? What's their max speed been? And that's what I want as a physical performance coach on the bigger day. The coach then gets loads of work with bigger units. So it's okay, we can work for longer because there's more players, you get less touches of the ball. You can get your team principles across because we have players to work in shape. Whereas on the intensive day, that's when I'm looking at the real mechanical load in terms of working in smaller areas, lots more touches on the ball, probably less time on the ball. So then the durations of the drills become that little bit longer. And it's working on sub-principles. So you might start working on unit work. You might take a back four, or you might take your left side, or you might take opposing fullbacks and wingers to do that isolated work and repeating what they're doing in the game, but in a higher frequency. And that higher frequency then allows us to overload. So I think, yeah, the main way that I would split my semi-pro week up would be 2 big training days, ideally with recovery in between, which again we'll touch on in a little bit. But this idea of, well, okay, are we going team day and a unit day? Are we going a bigger day and a smaller spaces day? Are we going real long duration mirroring the game, or we're going real short duration because we've got less players, more intensity, more touches of the ball? And I think what that tends to do then, I think performance coaches sometimes get a bad rep because we're managed a lot by the numbers. But if we take off the metrics at the bottom that we're looking for and just put these principles into play, you would tend to find that you would be able to see a real distinct difference between working over bigger spaces with bigger numbers and working with smaller spaces and smaller numbers. You would then see one day with real high speed running distance, hopefully a lot of sprint distance and players getting close to their max speed. And then on the Thursday, you're probably able to see that and go, well, okay, we've not really given the players a chance to get up to speed because we're using a smaller pitch size. But the mechanical load and the technical load is there because of the opportunity we've given them to speed up, to slow down, to accelerate, to decelerate in these smaller areas. And I think it's just having this idea of, okay, well, if we do have the luxury of 2 training days a week, what do we do on one day? What do we do on the other? To make sure that we're getting the balance and it's not just becoming Tuesday games, Thursday games, and then on Saturday we're playing it again.
And how would the pre-season game on the Saturday and the metrics that you receive from those games affect which session you choose for the Tuesday and which session you choose for the Thursday? Would it matter, or would you just be kind of sticking to the same principle?
Different clubs will have different philosophies, I think, and again we'll touch on this when we discuss recovery principles. But for me, my bigger day is always a Wednesday. I think it's just because I have the luxury of managing the training week. So Tuesday I would go smaller spaces, Wednesday I would go big, then I'd give the lads a recovery day Thursday, match prep on a Friday, and then into the game on Saturday. And the whole idea is we're trying to shift the mechanical and the physical load as far away from the game as possible, but also respecting recovery principles from the Saturday as such. So again, I think you want your game to be the showpiece of the week, so you want to be fresh for it. So again, we need plenty of time leading into it, so you don't want to be going too close and having a real heavy day on your Friday. And then likewise, you want to be able to go into the bigger days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, when your players are fresh, putting them yes, at a reduced risk of injury, but B, given the capacity to actually work hard and get something out of the session. I think if you try to do your biggest session on a Monday and give the lads maximum recovery before the next game on the Saturday, they're still going to be carrying a little bit of fatigue from the game prior to that or the conditioning session prior to that. they're still going to be quite leggy. And then the Monday becomes, like we spoke about at the start, it becomes this almost diluted session where you're trying to push, but we're not quite getting the metrics, and you're not quite seeing what you're seeing. So yeah, for me, I think if I was to take over at a semi-pro club tomorrow, and had the scope to do whatever we wanted to do over 2 training days, that's how I would run it. Whether you wanted to flip it, and some coaches would much prefer to do your intensive on a Tuesday and your extensive on a Thursday, so that the bigger spaces, the team principles, and the match prep is closer to the game. Again, it's down to personal choice. But for me, I think probably guided by the spate of hamstring injuries at the minute, they're just going up and up and up year on year. I want to give the sessions that are put in more physical load on those structures, as much space between the game as possible. So, and again, like I keep saying, we can discuss it when we sort of look at the recovery principles. Your high speed running there, your sprint distance there, your bigger areas there is one that will tend to put more mechanical load on your posterior chain. So we're talking mainly hamstrings. The load that your hamstrings have to tolerate at higher speeds is significantly greater than at your lower speeds. So for me, that's why I would position Tuesday where it is. You've then got 48 hours recovery into the Thursday session, which shouldn't really put too much stress on those structures, and then a further 48 hours into your game, which we want the lads to be fresh for. But we've also had chance to overload and build that protective load as well. So yeah, it's not a case of don't do it. It's a case of do it, but do it far enough away from the game where we're not scared to push. I think, and we'll get it wrong as well. Sometimes you go with the plan. Today is a great example of my own session of our training. We planned it to be an extensive day, to put stress on the players, to get them up into big high speed running distances. And we massively overshot what we expected to get from it. And I think, again, in the past, that would be something where I then start fretting, I start sweating that night, I start worrying about the next few days. But I'm also confident enough that, well, the lads are off tomorrow. They have a real light day Friday, then into the game on Saturday. So we are respecting that recovery as well. So it's not a case of doing it to hold back and protect the players too much. It just means that when we do push them and we want to overload certain metrics, we're happy that we're giving them time to recover for either the next tough physical session or the next fixture.
Awesome. So we've gone through the semi-pro side of things, and I know, again, not even some of you might not have the luxury of even having 2 touch points, during the week ahead of the game. So do you want to just talk us through how a youth team might kind of hide?
Yeah, and this is where, like you said, now we've gone through all that, and I've told you how important it is to have time in between the sessions, and how important it is to not have monotony of training sessions. And sometimes we don't have the luxury of that. So again, if we go back to the very first point when we spoke about the objectives of the sessions, it might be now that we have to sort of have 2 sub themes. So it might be that, yeah, we start with a smaller, a more intensive theme. So it might be that we break the game down initially. So it might be, like we said, we can do some unit work if you have the luxury of multiple coaches. It might be that you do some small-sided games or some small repetitive technical actions at the start of the session to overload the mechanical load. So it might even be then that if you were to look at your GPS report or your training metrics and clicked it first half and second half, that might mirror what we were saying in the Tuesday and Thursday session. So it might be that we start with the high mechanical load of your hips, your groins, your glutes. We're doing really small space work, and then we open up into the team principles. And I think it fits quite nice tactically as well. So if there's specific bits that you're wanting to see, like we said, you might want to see your centre half and your full back interacting in a certain way. You might want to see your 6 linking play quite well. If you can break down what you're wanting to see in small unit work, then put it into the 11v11 or whatever your numbers dictate. It might be an 8v8, but whatever you can do with maximum numbers, you then almost get this tactical progression of your session as well. But that naturally then allows us to achieve all the specific metrics. So I would always try and go small to big if I was just working 1 day a week with the players, and that way then, like we said, we're getting all the mechanical, the tight areas, the accelerations, the decelerations, the intense work done early. So shorter drills, real tight areas, and then we work into closer to the game. So we start to open the spaces up a little bit, and then that would naturally tick off. the high speed running, the sprint distance. So all these metrics that we're trying to overload to physically progress the player, we're then ensuring that we're getting as well. So again, like I said, the luxury is we can sit down and go, these are the objectives that I have for this session, and these are the objectives that I want for this session. Sometimes, okay, we might not have that luxury, and it becomes, well, okay, how are we going to achieve tight mechanical load? How are we going to achieve high speed running and sprint distance? And I think it all links back to my objective as a performance coach is it's to achieve these targeted metrics without any isolated physical drills. So I could be the most boring fitness coach in the world and say, I want my players to hit 700 meters of high speed running today. So I'll get them doing, I don't know, 10 box to boxes and a few sprints. But that gets no buy-in from the player. It has very little relevance to the game. There's no context around it. So if I can do it by designing drills that will elicit these numbers, then fantastic. And that it doesn't happen immediately. It doesn't happen overnight. I think I still get it way off sometimes in terms of what I expect drills to get, and then what we see. Players turn up on different days and look like completely different athletes. But yeah, it's just this idea of having something in the back of your head where you go, look, we are trying to achieve high speed distance. What's going to get that? And that's where the GPS numbers come in as well. I think over time you get to understand which drills elicit which outputs, and then you can almost clip yourself a drill library. So I think sometimes we put pressure on ourselves to, I don't know, to put on 50 different sessions over the space of a month, or 50 different drills. But if you have a bank of specific drills that we know are targeting these, then it's invaluable. It might be, like we said, we know that we need to achieve some high speed running. We've not had it in the previous session, but that counter-attacking drill that we put together achieves it. Fantastic. That's where that goes. And again, that's the beauty of understanding what your training sessions are actually eliciting.
Cool, good stuff. I'm just going to quick check see if there's any questions. I've not seen any questions come through yet, but just like I said at the beginning, guys, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask them. I'm keeping an eye on it, and if there's something that somebody asks and it's relevant to what we're talking about, I'll put it through to Ben. So next up, let's talk about the session content then. So physical periodization is the phrase you put down here. So do you want to explain to us what that is and how it might work in the sessions that they put together?
Yeah, we've pretty much touched on it on the planning slides, but like I put there, it's very simply just how we organise training, be that over the course of a week or over the course of a full season, to maximise physical performance. And that's where we then have these underpinning concepts and principles that allow us to do that. And again, we said it at the start, if we have no objective of the session, like I say, we then tend to get this diluted monotony. I like to use a phrase with the coaches that I work with of highs and lows. So days where we want to push, we push a certain metric. Days where we don't, we rest it. And having this high and low allows us to push physical capacity. Whereas if we're always in this middle ground and then expecting the lads to perform on match day, that's where we then start to create problems. But yeah, it's exactly that. I'd like to put there as well, it naturally ties in with a lot of the concepts that coaches will be wanting to achieve as well. So like we said, it might be unit work one day and match prep the next. So all of a sudden we're overloading smaller spaces, we're overloading accels, decels, intense actions. And then on the bigger day, we're overloading sprint distance, posterior chain work, and it just allows then recovery of certain muscle groups as well. And I put right at the bottom there, I like to work off again a 48-hour rule, and it almost frames it really well with coaches for them to eventually agree with what you wanted to do. So as a rule of thumb, it's not exact, it's not a perfect science, but for a structure to recover, I like to give it at least 48 hours to be fully recovered to then be able to go again. And what that's saying is if we play on Saturday at 3 p.m, well then Sunday I don't really want to do anything. And then Monday we're probably just out of that window. So if anything, it's going to be probably Tuesday before we really want to start pushing that player again. And then you naturally get into this idea of, well, okay, if we're respecting certain metrics, then we start to be able to periodize the week how we want to see it. I guess you could go off that and say, well, we should only really train once a week, but that's why we then break it down into certain types of training. So like we said on the previous slide with the semi-pro schedule, if we look at, let's go hamstring strain again, it seems to be an epidemic the last few seasons. if we're really pushing a player on a Saturday, you'd like to think that he's achieving 90, 95, 100% of his max speed. Fantastic. No issues with that whatsoever. We then need to respect that recovery. So then that takes us through Sunday, that takes us through Monday, and then into Tuesday, at least before we think, right, we can start attacking this again. So if it's a semi-pro, it might be like, okay, Tuesday, we push them again. And it's not because we want to reduce the amount we're doing, but when we do work over longer distances and want to encourage high speed running, we want to actually push past what our players normally do. Because otherwise, then the lads will do what they've always done. If you're pushing 600-700 high speed meters in a game, and then in training you're doing 300, well, how do you expect to get better? But then again, if we push them on the Tuesday, then well, we need to respect that. So 24 hours Wednesday, 48 hours Thursday. But if you remember back to the previous slides, on the Thursday, we're actually targeting something different. So while there will be some content where they may run quick, I don't want to scare coaches off sprinting twice in a week. But if we're really pushing that metric on the Tuesday, on the Thursday, we chase something different. So those structures and those movement patterns are allowed to recover. And then when we go into the game on the Saturday, we're that little bit fresher. And it might be that if it might be that we have this same chat in 5 years' time, and there's a massive epidemic of hip and groin injuries from real small space decelerations, and we go, well, actually, probably safer putting the sprint work closer to the game and the smaller space stuff. So I'm not married to a principle. If I had a brand new coach come in tomorrow and said, no, Ben, we do tougher sessions towards Wednesday, Thursday in terms of high speed running and sprint, and we do the smaller space stuff on Monday and Tuesday, then that's fine. We tie into it as long as we're respecting certain types of training. So I think that 48-hour rule should, if you take one thing away, that's probably the easiest thing to take away today. 48 hours between similar types of training.
And does that principle change depending on like age of the players, gender, or would you keep that 48 hours rule across the board?
I think I think you when you start talking about youth athletes, you bring into players around peak height velocity and that are growing, then the stress on those players again is even greater than a well-conditioned professional athlete. The only issue is when we start talking about extending that window, well, then it's like we said earlier, you end up probably training once a week and going into a game. And there might be specific cases where I've had players in the past where we've done that and we've let players recover, we've let players have extra time off the pitch, but only on an individual basis. So I think if we start to go, I don't want to use the phrase softer, but a little bit more cautious, then we end up not really getting much training exposure. And again, I think we touched on, if anyone's on the previous presentation, what we're trying to do is build tolerance to what the players will experience in the game. So if we're not actually achieving these metrics in the week, we're actually leaving the players hung out to dry on a weekend to when they are asked to do it. So if we're doing no sprinting in the week, no high speed running volume near what they'll be doing in games, we're doing no small spaces stuff. If we just did a tactical week all week, really slow, trying to get concepts across, and then ask a player to work at max intensity on a Saturday, well, why should they be able to? We've not given them the chance to get used to it. So I think if we went for this idea of giving them time to recover in between bouts, then we're ideal.
We've got one question that's coming from Paul, which, let's quickly just cover it now. Paul's asked, how do we know what level to push our team to without having any way to collect data using tracking GPSs, etc.?
It's a fantastic question, to be honest. I'm trying to think back to the last club I was at where we didn't have GPS. And it was non-league when I first started with Halifax Town. We didn't have access to it. And yet we're still competing at sort of mid-table conference team. It's difficult. It's difficult. I think over time you start to be able to get a gauge of your own players the longer you work with them. So the longer I'm with a group, the easier it is for me to watch a session and say, these lads have done a lot here. But I think the easiest way to go about that, Paul, would be to have quite a small bank of drills. So rather than, like we said, putting pressure on yourself to have 40, 50 different drills over a month with the lads trying to keep them engaged, I think understand what we do and get gradual progression. So it might be that if there's a few drill examples that we'll touch on later on as well, but it might be if you're doing a specific counter-attacking drill where you know that the lads will be opening the legs and will be sprinting. We don't need GPS in that instance to tell us that, yes, they've been sprinting. it'd be nice to get insight into how much and how far and at what speed, so that we can go into that next level of detail. But it would be a case of just gradual progression for me, and that's where pre-season comes into it. It might be that I think everybody wants to do the toughest week in the first week and see players throw up and be doubled over. And I think aerobically it's probably a little bit safer. But when we try and overload these high intensity actions, I will be very gradual with it. I think the Raymond Verheyen model, if you can access it, there'll be loads of references to it on the internet. That's a real nice place to start if you're trying to periodize like a semi-pro or an amateur side without having much input, and it's just working at self-prescribed percentages of max. So it might be that if we're doing a drill in week 1, say, right, lads, we're going to go 5 reps of a set distance. It might be you decide box to box, pitch width, whatever you wanted to work with, and it might be prescribed those at 70%. There'll be some that run at 95, there'll be some that run at 62, but without having that insight, it's probably the best we can do. And then week on week, just gradually chip away at those intensities. So as long as by the time they play, they've had exposure to 90%, 100% max efforts, then we've at least given them a chance to build tolerance and build this chronic load of running, of changing direction, of decelerating, of accelerating, to then apply it into the game. So yeah, to answer your question, I don't think I've done a very good job of that, to be honest, but to answer your question, I think without having that insight, it's very, very difficult. So you end up probably treading that little bit more carefully. I think the only way you know you've done too much when you can't see it in front of you is when we have players potentially dropping out of training as well. And I guess that's the beauty of having access to this information.
Exactly, and we'll go over some of the principles that we like to go through at Pitchero and GPS as well, of training for the game. We'll touch on that a bit at the end, but yeah, I think that was a good answer there, Ben. So let's just click back into this. So you kindly put together a example session plan as well for both of the intensive and extensive sessions.
Yeah, it's just a couple of really basic overviews of how the days sort of differ. So always follow a similar focus. The warm up to both days, I would always try and get some sort of activity that introduces the movements that we're trying to overload. So if we think back to what we said about intensive versus extensive, your intensive day is this smaller area, loads of touches of the ball, no time on the ball. So a lot of the work and a lot of the intensity are ramped right up. So there's a lot of acceleration, a lot of deceleration. So these are the drills that I would start with, even if it is getting the lads working over 5, 10, 15 yards, just to start working that way. The unit work then becomes sort of some sort of individual focus, because again, we're trying to keep everything small pictures. So it might be that we have scenarios, it might be a real small possession with constraints, just to start to overload, again, the structures that we're trying to hit. And again, it might be that as we start to progress into more game-specific drills, like I said there, I've got a 1v1 down, so it's exposing you to this idea of real high mechanical or real high intensity. And again, if anybody's ever tried to prescribe a 1v1 of anything over sort of 30, 45 seconds, the quality drops off a cliff immediately. So I guess going back to Paul's question earlier, you'll almost see it as well. So I think if you're thinking, well, all right, I'm going to run a 1v1, see how far we can push these players, they'll soon show you when they've done enough, because the quality will dip. A good 1v1, I'd work for about 30 seconds, absolute tops, because the quality will die off. And then the way that we start to overload it, rather than just going longer and longer and longer, is maybe reducing the rest period between repetitions. And the way that I'd start to see that come out is then putting the lads into some games. Again, it doesn't have to be a 3v3, doesn't have to be a 1v1, but then I'd start to open it up and give the lads more options to apply what they've seen in a game-specific scenario. And again, I've put some rough measurements on there, which again, we'll touch on one of the later slides. And then again, your extensive day, same idea, same sort of themes behind the day in terms of the warm-up mirrors what we're wanting the lads to try and do in the session. So they don't necessarily have to come straight on the grass and sprint at 100%. But are the lads ready to sprint? Have they had a chance to work up, I was saying? Have they been at 70, 80%? Got a chance to open the legs in planned manner? I then like to do more extensive drills for that second part of the session as well. So like a passing drill there is ideal. So we're still getting loads of technical detail, but the lads are actually covering distance from A to B to C as they work around the drill. The unit work then this is where I get a lot of joy in terms of achieving the sprint exposure and the high speed running distance. Now, if the lads were clever, they would see that it's usually just running, but a fantastic drill I like to use, again, I'll reference it, and I think it's in the next slide, is just an overload attacking drill. If you miss, you sprint back. If they're scoring, you're the defender, you sprint back. So it's pretty much a bit of football with a sprint tagged on the end of it. But I think just because there's that little bit of relevance of we've lost possession, we've lost the ball, getting the lads used to reacting, turning and sprinting back in, getting back on side, or joining the counter attack. I think with that little bit more context, it's really, really easy to get the buy-in from the players rather than we'll do a little 5v5, right, we'll go and do your sprints. And then again, we start to look at your game, go on a larger area, bigger pitches. So we can go longer duration as well because there's more players. More players mean and more space means more time on the ball, probably means less touches. So that's where we then tend to go 8, 10, 12-minute blocks of training. Whereas in a 3v3, if you keep that going for 10 minutes, same as you said with the 1v1s, you'll know pretty shortly that the lads have done and the quality will completely die off. So that's kind of how I'd run both sessions, with every part of the session always trying to link back to that theme, be it extensive or intensive.
Cool. So shall we go through some of those intensive workouts that sessions that you've put
Yeah,
together?
so these are just a couple of examples of what we've done and sort of why we'd include them. So I think the unit work, something we've done the other day, is just it might be that we're tactically looking at defending wide spaces. But from a physical point of view, it's fantastic for the intensive day because it becomes a 1v1. It's a case of we're asking you defender to defend the box, we're asking you winger to penetrate or deliver across. And it's a small space, it's 1v1, you've not got many options, you don't have much time on the ball, and that will elicit a lot of high intensity accelerations and decelerations. So the intensity of that top session is much higher than if you were to introduce more and more players. I think similarly on the small sided game below, just by putting fewer players in that and reducing the pitch size, we start to increase the high intensity change of direction, the number of touches on the ball, but also the time that the lads have on the ball. So again, real intense drills that I wouldn't run for long. And again, I'll just put at the bottom there. We'll touch on the next slide as well, but it's really important to consider the pitch size. There's no hard and fast rule. There's loads of data out there on it. There's loads of research on it, and you can go down a little bit of a rabbit hole. But what I would say is, again, it kind of links back to what Paul asked. You will soon understand what sort of pitch size your players can manage on with certain numbers of players in that. But again, if I was going blind into a session, I would usually work off 6 meters per player. So if it was a 3v3, I would work off the number of players on one side. So we'd have sort of an 18 to 20 meter wide, and then I'd add 30% onto that as well. So it then becomes 20 by 28 meters. Just again, there's no hard and fast rule of it has to be 18 wide and then add exactly 30% on. But I think it's a real good place to start to give you a rough guide. And then what I'd do from there on your intensive day, I would go maybe a little bit tighter than that. So it might be that if you start to work off that metric and think, you know what, it actually works quite well, it might be that you then take 2 meters off or 5% off. And again, as the pitch becomes smaller, we're getting a lot less time on the ball, which means we're getting a lot more higher accelerations, decelerations, because you have no time to anticipate what's happening. And again, play around with these sizes. Like I said, it's not a rule. It's just something that I like to work off to give me a rough start point. And I think on the next slide, the extensive one is similar again. So yeah, like we said, that the unit work, we're trying to elicit these extensive metrics. We're trying to put stress on these structures that we would see used in the extensive activities of the game. So I think that's the one that I mentioned there. Real simple drill, but we start to go bigger. So you've got a 2v1 overload. Your defenders encouraged to recover back in quick. The player who starts the drill also has to get in fast. So straight away, you've got 3 players running towards the box. If it's successful and they score, which you'd like to think they would on a 2v1 overload, then the defender would run back to a predefined distance. So like we've got the cone set up there, just short of the centre circle. It might be that earlier in pre-season you're a little bit nice and you go a bit tighter. It might be as the lads get better, you get them right up to the halfway line. But then all of a sudden we've got a half pitch sprint. Whereas if you're asking lads to do it organic, when you're asking lads to do it sort of manufactured, you don't always get the intensity that they want. If you can encourage them to do it in these situations, then you start to see it come out in the games as well. And all of a sudden we start to get this really nice mix and synergy between the tactical and the technical concepts that you want to see on the pitch, but also the physical outcomes. And then it's like we said earlier, it's not just a passing drill, a possession, a game, and then the lads aren't really run far, we'll run them at the end. Then we start to integrate it. And again, on the games, the same principles apply, but we're putting more players on a larger pitch. So the total distance that you will achieve on this and the number of times you get a chance to open up will start to increase as well. And again, same principles apply in terms of pitch sizes, but obviously rather than going smaller than that rule, we'd start to go bigger. So again, using that 6x30 and then starting to increase it will start to help to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're going to do. But yeah, that's how the 2 days different. Hopefully it just gives you a little bit of an insight on how one day, be it a Tuesday and a Thursday, or your Monday and your Wednesday, however you train, how one day looks from a planning point of view to the next. So work from a warm-up that introduces the concepts of what we're trying to achieve and starts to get the structures ready for the session. Some sort of positional and unit work that then will elicit that, and then working into more game-specific scenarios like we've done there.
Cool. No, that 6 meter and 30% rule is that's just gold dust. I remember doing that when I was playing, and never even thought about just the actual areas that we were playing in. But thinking about it now, it makes total sense, doesn't it, that you would put
absolutely. And there's loads of variables that will affect that as well. And so if you're working with youth athletes, obviously we go a little bit smaller. It might be, like I said, that you try that one day and you just think it just doesn't work for this drill or for this group of players, but it just gives you that start point rather than sticking 2 goals and 4 cones down and going, right, that does it look about right?
Yeah.
And again, there'll be a lot of experienced coaches on this call who have their own spaces and pitch sizes that work. It's something that does develop over time. But like I said, you can go down a bit of a rabbit hole online with a lot of the more recent research. I think, especially over the last 10 years since, I think Tim Gabbett did a really good study on it in terms of defining how pitch size affects training output. But that's the general rule. Obviously, we go smaller amount of space per player. Then they're going to be a lot more technical load, a lot more intense actions. We've got more space per player. They're going to get a chance to open up and time on the ball.
Cool. So we talked a lot about the kind of team elements then. So you put down some really useful content around individual conditioning. So we put individual extras, and especially early in pre-season. So do you want to just talk us through what you've put down on here?
Yeah, again, this tends to be the bread and butter for coaches that don't have the luxury of loads and loads of contact times. I think especially before fixtures kick in, or if you do have that idea of one training session and one game a day, what I'd start to do is just build that aerobic base. The reason we do that, like we put there, is you're starting to increase your mechanical load in these training sessions. So players do need to get used to ball striking. They do need to get used to coming up against opponents. They do need to get used to these 1v1, 3v3 scenarios, however you want to frame it. But at the same time, like we said right at the start, without an aerobic base, then we've got very poor chance of getting much out of the season. Like I said, that's really, really simple to prescribe and it's really, really easy to do. So I think for the sessions that the players are going to do away from training, if we can make it really, really easy, take the thinking out of it, it could be something as simple as I put a bit of a framework down. So if we're trying to build that aerobic base, we're looking at a longer total distance for the entire session. So looking maybe between 4 and 5K. Again, if they do 3 or 6, they're not going to not be conditioned or break down injured, but it's a nice place to start. I think working for longer durations, then what that does is you can't sprint for 4 minutes. So if we're using 3, 4, 5 minute blocks, the lads aren't going to be able to sprint and put stress on these structures that we're trying to tailor training towards. So that's where we'd use longer work durations. And an example of that might be 4-1Ks. I think I've probably used that for the last 15, 20 years of my career of just doing kilometre run, couple of minutes rest, do that 4 times. And I think if there's anybody that's not quite started pre-season yet, probably with older athletes as well, I might keep it away from the younger lads. I don't really like seeing youth athletes just running needless blocks of conditioning. But I think if And there's anybody who's sort of heading into week 1, week 2 with some semi-pro athletes, look at just getting them out, running the 1Ks, couple of minutes rest, go again, and just being able to, it's an easy way of getting the lads competing as well. Get the lads to do it on Strava, get the lads to do it on the watch, get them to send times in, and as boring as it is, we can try and then become that little bit more engaged on the bits that they're doing away from the club. And then again, as you start to increase your intensity, I think your total distance probably still stays around the same. Around training sessions, if we're training for around an hour, are usually anywhere between sort of 4 and 6K anyway. So it's getting them used to that chronic total training volume. But then as we've got that aerobic base, we're looking to reduce the work duration. And what that does is obviously we can run that little bit quicker for 1 to 2 minutes than we can 4 to 5 minutes. So you naturally increase in intensity without even having to prescribe speeds or paces or and again, it might be something similar where we do 8 by 400 meters, so you're getting just over 3K with a minute rest in between, a little bit of a warm up on. All of a sudden, you've got another 4K session. So if you're only getting that one training session every week, like we said, 5K, looking to figure out a thin air, just by doing that second session, and we're starting to build this protective look, starting to build this idea of what can our players tolerate over the course of a week, and just by doing that, then we've got 10K out of one training exposure. So we have 5 that they go and do themselves, 5 in the middle of the training week, and then when they hit the game as well, we're not going in chronically underloaded as such. So I think the key take home for anything that you're asking your players to go away and do is keep it as simple as possible. I've made the mistake of sending 15, 20-page PDF documents out to play, and this is even professional players, and deep down you know it's not getting done. So I've gone full circle, and it's a case of just keeping it as simple as we possibly can.
Yeah, I think that absolutely it works for all levels, doesn't it? If you keep it simple, you can't control what everyone's going to be doing away from the training sessions, but you can try and steer them in the right way.
Best program in the world done poorly is obviously a lot worse than a real simple one done properly.
Absolutely. And then so I feel like we've covered quite a few of the principles that you wanted to get through there, Ben, and we've got at least one question to go through, which we'll touch on in a minute. But if anyone's got any more questions from what Ben's just gone through, or from anything that you feel is a bit related, please put them in the Q&A, and we've got some time now to just go through that with Ben. But we just wanted to touch on the kind of principle that we like to go by at Pitchero GPS, which is train for the game. So training activity should mirror match activity plus 30%. Now it's not always the case that you'll be able to, like we saw with Paul's question, easily measure that and track that without any technology. So if you are looking to get these kind of principles ingrained into your training programs, then really, we'd love to give you a demo of the Pitchero GPS product and show you how it would help and how we could use the metrics and the technology that we provide to then help you improve your training performance, not just improve your performance in a match. It's about improving your training performance, so then you can then be ready for the game. So yeah, anything else to add before I go through the Q&A, Ben?
Yeah, no, it's exactly that. I think this idea of, I think the plus 30% straight away, you look at it and think, well, if we're doing 10K a game, how are we going to do the 13K training session? It's not a case of just doing more than we're doing on match day globally or generally. I think it's overloading specific metrics, like we said. So hopefully what you've been able to take away from today is that the training week for me is certain parts of the game broken down, and then that's when we can start to overload them. And I think it's a case of, if you just do that indefinitely, then we're going to have players who cover 5 kilometers of high speed running a game. It's not that. It's a case of, over the course of a season, can we push these specific metrics? So if we have a player, like we said, who's covering, I don't know, 0.5 kilometer of high speed running a game, can we start to creep that one up? And it might not be that sticking 30% on it in that next training session's relevant for where they're at in a training week or fits in with the tactical periodization. But if we have that figure in the back of our heads that this is what he's doing regularly, so we can do a 6-8 week audit again, like we discussed in the previous webinar. Once we've got an idea of what a match looks like for a player or what training looks like for a player. We understand what progression is, and we understand how to push these specific metrics. So I think that's certainly where I can give more sort of plan with more detail with the coaches and with the players themselves, just by having this information. If I know what a player does on match day, and I know what a player does on an average training day, I know what we need to do to try and push these metrics. And there's so many case studies and examples of how just having this insight has allowed me to push a player on and get more out of them in fixtures.
Cool. Yeah, good stuff. Right, we've got some questions coming in. So I'll go with the first one. That's right, Ben. So this one is from someone else called Paul. He says he's got an hour training session a week with his team, which is a girls under 12s team. So he's really interested to get your thoughts on how you'd break the day down here into an hour, which I know you can't really do everything in an hour, but how would you go about that?
Yeah, it's obviously it's real difficult, and I think obviously the key that you said there to me is it's an under 12s team, so it's got to be exciting, it's got to be fun. So if I had an under 12s team, they're going to turn up and they are just wanting to play games. All they want to do is play football, keep it competitive, keep it exciting. So I think the first thing I'd do is I'd try and work, like we said, small to big. So my hour-long session would start with some sort of small spaces game. I think with under 12s, it doesn't even have to be football. Some sort of movement, coordination-based game for sort of 10, 15 minutes potentially. Introduce the ball, just real light heart, get them moving in these smaller spaces. I would then try and do some smaller area work. So be that a little possession or a little passing drill or work where we've got nice big work to rest ratios. So maybe it might be a 2v2 drill into mini goals. It might be a 3v3 possession with end players. That's something where we're then overloaded the intensive metrics that we're looking at. So you can be happy that the players are getting loads of acceleration, loads of deceleration, chance to work in these smaller, tighter areas. And then over the course of the next couple of drills, start to go bigger and then into game specifics. So I think, like I said, if these girls are coming in once a week, they're going to want to play games. And you have a lot of parents still on the touchline who are expecting their child to come in and play games as well. So it's just a case of, start small, something really fun and engaging to begin with. That, again, acceleration, deceleration doesn't have to be done with the ball. It can be as simple as racing, slaloms, noughts and crosses, anything like that, where you're just getting that engagement, but disguising, like we said, being able to speed up and slow down really quickly. So we know that we take that one off, and then to get the physical periodization, start to really open the legs up and go that way.
Good stuff. I've got two more questions that we've got to go through. One of them is really going to put you on the spot, Ben, so I'll leave that one to the last one. But the next one is from Oliver. He says, in terms of pitch sizing, are there any rules similar to the 6 meter plus 30% you would use when working with overloads in sessions? For example, a 6v3 or a 5v2?
It's a good question, Oliver. I think, again, if I was sat down planning tomorrow's session, coach said to me, I want to do an overload drill, we'd probably usually go closer in terms of an overload. I think when you've got such a big overload, like a 3-player overload, you're not giving the underloaded team much chance to do anything. So I would always try and go at max maybe a 2-player overload, but I always tend to do a 3v2, a 4v3, because that's the kind of situation where, especially with sort of older athletes, you would expect them to be able to do something, and it's the situations that they'll find themselves in games as well. It's uncommon that you would find yourself with a 3-man overload. And if you do, I don't think there's any real drill to prepare you for it. It's getting back on side, or it's getting back in a position as quick as possible. So that's why I tend to use a 3v2, a 4v3. And I think then that determined, because it's match specific, I would do it on a pitch anyway. So I'd use normal pitch sizes. So if I was doing a 4v3 overload, it might be that I do it on half a pitch to simulate exactly where that's going to happen in the game. And again, it fit really nicely on an extensive day, because again, when we've got that overload, you're going to have at least 3 players working to get back in, or if you've got wingers that are trying to overlap, it just gives you that perfect scenario to have that overload, and you've got 3 players who have to work hard. And again, like we said earlier, if it's an extensive day, I'd then maybe get them getting back into position, or sprinting to get back on side, or making it back over the halfway line, or however you want to frame it. But it's a really, really nice drill for that. So to summarize, no, I don't really have any specific rules for overloaded or underloaded drills, because I would usually do it to mirror when we would see it in a game, and because of that, I would then use it on normal pitch dimensions.
Cool. No, that makes sense. And then the last one we've got in is, someone wants to know, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to tell us this, who's the best trainer and worst trainer you've worked with that we'd know, and why?
You know, wow. I think the best I can probably answer. There's loads and loads of players that spring to mind, and I think there's loads that would be disgusted that I've gone down down the other route. I think I'll be able to name some of the best, but I don't think I'll name the worst, unfortunately. It's a great question, to be fair. That you'd know. One of the best, a young fullback at Liverpool called Isaac Mabea. Right back, rapid, an absolute dream to work with, and nothing was too much, be that in pre-training, in prep, out on the pitch, just absolutely fantastic. I think that there's a lot of players which I potentially won't name, that are the complete polar opposite of that, that are hard to drive, that are hard to get out on the grass, that are hard to get these metrics out. But I think that's why it's important, like we said earlier, to try and you need to engage the players. I think if someone's not achieving these distances, or training at the standard we'd expect, then, well, yeah, I think that the higher up the pyramid you go, well, it's sitting them down and going, no, it's your job. We expect this of you. I think if it's a non-league player, or someone who's not getting paid to train, then try and engage them with the drills. If they're not achieving it, put them in scenarios that really get them going. So if it is a striker who likes the counter-attacking side of the game, we'll get his sprints doing that, play some unachievable balls into him where he really does have to open up and go. But I've really, really copped out of answering that question there.
No,
yeah, I apologise, but I'll probably lose a lot of customers if I start the worst trainers were.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's very diplomatic. Good answer that.
Yeah, right.
Okay, cool. That's all the questions we've got in the Q&A. So I think we'll leave it there for today. We did run over on the half an hour that we said we would be, but I think all of the content, no, I think it was really good stuff. There's some really useful tips, and even just breaking things down to not just at your level, you're doing that at the professional level, breaking it down to the other levels has been really helpful for me. I've played amateur and also help out with a junior team. So just having that kind of discussion, an in-depth discussion about a session is helpful enough for me. But giving all the extra detail and how that kind of works for people who are playing at the kind of maybe the semi-pro level, I think it was really, really useful.
I think it's one of the beauties of the product as well, the fact that we are on hand to answer these questions for customers and for coaches that are interested as well. It's not just a case of, there you go, there's your product, there's your GPS, go away and use it. I think it's, well, okay, let's help you understand the data, let's help you apply it as well. Yeah, nice. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for everyone that's joined tonight.
Good stuff. Cheers, Ben. Yeah, so we'll be sending out a recording of this session probably tomorrow now. I'll also attach these slides, so if anyone wants to see the kind of breakdowns of the sessions again and the schedule, they'll be on there as well. And if anyone is looking for more information about how Pitchero GPS can help you this preseason, help you for the season beyond, then please do get in touch and reply to the email that you get tomorrow. We can give you a demo, and as Ben says, we provide we're not just going to give you the product and let you go for it. We'll be showing you how you can use it without that sports science background, and how to get to the metrics that matter to help you for the season ahead. So really appreciate your time, Ben, and hopefully everyone who was attended was very it's got a lot of information out of it. And yeah, until next time, we'll see you later on. Cheers, guys. See you later.
Bye.
Bye bye.